We can use silence to help understand the nature of conventional, objective, and ultimate reality. In plain terms, we can use silence to help us deal with psychological problems. I'm going to walk you through how this is possible. The first step is to think of silence as the basis of controlling the contents of our experience. To those who are not familiar, when I'm saying contents of experience, you can think of the basis of experience itself as being there, and then the contents of what we can experience being superimposed. It's just like how we say the contents and states of consciousness. If you have consciousness itself, the types of contents that you can see in any given moment, like if you're asleep, you might have a blank state or you might have dreams. These are different types of contents within your sleeping state, which would be the state of your consciousness. When we can use silence to help control these types of contents, we can control the way in which we adhere to the contents versus the basis of experience. Imagine that you had a house in front of you. If you have this house and you look at it, you might notice all the contents of this house. You might notice the windows, the doors, the walls, the panels. All those different aspects are there. Now, if you think of a house and that is all you see, your perception and experience will be filled by that content of experience. If you can slow down a little bit more, use silence, and not adhere to these contents about the house, you might see that the house is now standing on a foundation. That foundation stands on the ground, and all of those things come together to help support the house. Now we're using silence to not adhere to the house, but to adhere to the ground state with which that house comes from. The ground state is like the basis, the house is like the content of that basis. Normally, we are stuck looking at the house and we forget about the basis with which this house has come from and stands upon. In a similar manner, we can do the same thing with our own experience, our day-to-day lives, internal and external experiences. If you think of those as contents within who you are, you see that all your thoughts, psychological processes, ways of thinking, internal experiences, what you do on a day-to-day basis, all of it falls as contents within your normal waking state. Even your normal waking state, that is a state within this basis of what you are. Now, I'm not going to use the word consciousness because consciousness, again, turns into a concept the moment we talk about it. Instead of giving a positive label here, just want you to think about what remains when you account for all these different aspects. When you account for what you can experience, your thoughts, activities, all those different things, and you release attachment from them, and you're able to look past them through the basis of remaining still and silent to them, what is it that remains? This is the type of reductive analysis we see in many different meditation forms. Jhanas are perhaps one of the best known for this. In recent consciousness studies, we also see discussion of minimally phenomenal experiences, or MPEs. This is also getting at a similar type of experience. You can take this reductive analysis to the point that there are no longer any contents to remove within your experience, and it becomes a minimal state. And that minimal state is perhaps the closest we can get to seeing this basis or unknowable basis of what we are. And it is unknowable because the moment we try to know it, we're adding in a content, right? When you add in this content, you are now taking steps backwards. So you can't positively get there, but you can, by negation, realize through what it is not, what is there. If that sounds like a very strange way to think and it's very counterintuitive, good, because that's exactly how it feels when you do this. When you make that realization, especially for the first time, it is quite mind boggling, to say the least. It turns into a more or less permanent psychological shift in how you see things. Things are now contents within what you are, as opposed to the basis of what you thought you were. This is where the idea of not being attached to our experiences, our thoughts, and all those different aspects comes into play. When we're talking about that reduction of attachment, this is exactly what we're getting at. In clinical psychology, when we talk about removing attachment from language functions and just seeing language as a function of the mind, this is the same or similar mechanism, but it is applied on a much smaller scale, which is something that we would expect to see within science, because that smaller scale is something that we can take in a lab setting, study through empirical data, and analyze with scientific scrutiny. It's much more difficult to do the same when we're talking about the whole of our experience. But when you take these spiritual paths, or more importantly, when you look within yourself and you're able to maintain that stillness and silence within yourself and all your different experiences, even down to your perceived sense of self, that's when you see these truths for yourself. Now, whether you buy into these insights or you decide to discard them, that is ultimately up to you. But whichever path you take there, those are still contents within what you are. You can't cut any deeper than that. Your ability to even cut things, to break down or take reductive analyses, all those things become inapplicable after a certain point of reductive analysis. And yet, the basis for all of your experience and all the different things you can perceive, it goes on. It does continue, and that is a truth of reality. When you see these things for yourself, you get to appreciate silence that much more. And at any given moment, this is where you hear many different people talk about the importance of the present moment. At any given moment, you can recognize this truth through the basis of silence to all the different contents and states at any given present moment. And when you do this, you see that at any given present moment, once again, that's all you have. Everything else that you tack on, those are the contents, and those are aspects of conventional reality, aspects of your mind. Those are all add-ons that you have put on later on. But when you maintain this aspect of stillness and silence, and you just abide in that present moment as is, that's when you let go of attachment to many different things that can lead to psychological suffering. Our minds are really good at doing this because evolutionarily, that is what the mind does. It problem solves, it contemplates, and it tries to figure things out so that we can navigate, survive, reproduce, replicate, thrive, and so on. All those different things are useful in their own way, but if we're looking at the psychology of awakening, finding peace and freedom from psychological suffering, you have to be able to maintain that degree of silence and stillness to your own experience. That doesn't mean you can't appreciate aspects of life and live out life in a peaceful or enjoyable way, but it does mean that you have to be able to maintain a degree of detachment and silence to your own experience, because unless you are capable of doing this all the time, you might go in and out in terms of recalling that all of your experiences are limitations in this sense. So, the main takeaway here is that we can use silence as a way to remove different variables from our experience to help get a more core understanding of what it is that remains when we take this reductive form of analysis. This is where it's really important to engage in first person practices, because until you directly engage in these practices for yourself, it's going to be very difficult to understand what we're talking about here. But once you make this shift and you realize these things for yourself, then you will be able to see how different parts of your own experience appear as one cohesive whole, but in actuality, there are lots of different superimposed layers of perception upon a more fundamental basis of what you are and what you experience. So I'll leave it at that. Hope this helps. In terms of maintaining this silence and stillness, ideally you can do this at any given moment. And when you can maintain this ability, it helps keep you free from psychological suffering, because the basis of what can lead to psychological suffering, those have all been detached from as you abide in this state of stillness and silence.